you will.
The amount of leaks that come out of the administration is, I mean, it's atrocious. You know, their whole, I mean, we'll talk about like the General Milley book. I mean, the whole book written just like the one during Donald Trump that I'm sure is going to be off of largely not uncorroborated but unnamed sources, anonymous sources. You know, the amount of stories that are written off of someone with knowledge of the situation said this. Like, that's all well and good, and it's like the story is very salacious, so it's very interesting to read, and like, you know, if that were true, then it would be very interesting. But because we have no idea of the credibility of this person other than this journalist saying, believe me, but I can't tell you who they are.
Exactly.
When we walk around every day saying you can't believe anything the media says, I don't know why. I struggle to give anything too much credence, but I also, at my core, would like to believe, why would you say something like this if it wasn't true?
Yeah.
You know, why would you just...
off the wall. It's like, it has to be. But,
yeah.
And we'll get more into that when we start talking about the Milley stuff.
And I mean, just as a general, I didn't mean that specifically. I mean, as a general theme, any of these stories that come out that are made by uncorroborated sources, why would someone say something so salacious if it wasn't true? Like, why would you
with like
say, you know?
Yeah, with the border crisis stuff, you know, all the stories that are coming out, it's like, you know, from a source who is being, you know, anonymous because he's not authorized to speak on this thing. It's like I understand that, but how am I supposed to trust you after the what you've put us through over the last decade? How am I supposed to trust that you're not full of bullshit right now? Every single story is an unnamed source familiar with, or an anonymous source who, you know, has direct knowledge of. It's like, how is that sourcing?
Right.
I don't understand. Yeah. And that's going to come up, I think, a lot today with all the things we talk about.
And it's something I think we could bear to pay more attention to when we bring up articles. You know, because we only, as people who are at this point independent journalists, you know what I'm saying? We don't have anybody working for us. We also have full-time jobs, so we can't go to Washington, D.C. and investigate these things ourselves, right? We have to rely on the reporting of these big news agencies. There's only so much that we can... Same thing with Tim Pool, right? There's only so much that you can do in reporting these things. But
the best way, like, for us to do it is to find a story, find as many sources talking about that story as possible from all different political persuasions, small media, major media, and then taking official statements from White Houses and things like that, and government sources, and then kind of amalgamating
which
them
is
all
what we
together.
do in the background, you know?
And that's what we do every day of our lives.
Right, and it's why most of the videos and the clips and stuff that we play here are from the press briefings, because it's easier. The best way is to take what they're saying and then use everything that we've read to kind of go back with, well, this is what's actually happening.
Yeah. So. It's a weird balance because, again, there's that trust issue every time. But what else are you going to do without having the millions and millions of dollars in funding to be able to hire people to do stuff like that on the ground, individual investigative reporting? And it's, you know, everybody can just do what they can.
I think this is a great jumping off point actually to talk about COVID, right?
Yeah.
Because just like in journalism, in COVID-19 and so much was going on, there are these enormous administrative bodies that are standing behind this, the CDC, the FDA, things like that. When I was talking to my uncle the other day, he was talking about the FDA and was saying the FDA like has no incentive to deceive anybody. You know, there's like, which is true. I grant that there is no incentive for the FDA to deceive anybody. My issue with the FDA is the insane amount of drugs and treatments and things like that get approved, and we only find out 10 years later, oh, this gives you cancer. Like fucking Chantix. All of the Chantix is getting pulled off the shelf right now. I'm telling people, if you're already taking it, you have to continue to take it because, and this is so random, right? When I listen to the Shane Show, do you remember the Shane Show?
Day, dude.
Back in the day. Yeah. Shane Powers was taking Chantix.
Yeah, and what was Chantix for?
Yeah, it was to quit smoking. It's a drug to help you quit smoking. Mm-hmm. It made him fucking crazy.
Yeah.
It made him absolutely crazy. And that's very common, you know, like the side effects from Chantix are insane. Yeah. And so now we're to find out that actually it can give you cancer also. And so again, Just like the vaginal meshes that I always bring up, because
Yeah.
those, and it's funny, right? But those are the commercials that we see all the time, because these are the things that impact enormous amounts of people
Yeah.
that get them and they think that they're fine. And not just vaginal mesh, but hernia mesh, all that stuff, right? But those
Yeah.
those ones are very common.
There was
And
the HPV vaccine too.
Yes.
There was fallouts with that. I forget what that was called.
yeah,
I'll look
well,
that
and
up
we
real
just
quick.
talked about all of the different drug manufacturers, that the multi-billion-dollar lawsuit over opioids.
Gardasil, that's what it was.
Oh, the multi-billion-dollar lawsuit over opioids.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's
And
that,
it's not
that all happened.
And
you
it's
know?
not even just opioids. Like when you start looking into like all the various lawsuits of
Right.
these big pharma companies and stuff, like it's for a ton of shit.
Right.
And it has been, these lawsuits are on record going back to like when they're first putting out all the different
Zeke
drugs,
sent us
man.
the one earlier
Yeah.
this week from Pfizer.
Yeah, and he's learning about a case study in a class
Right.
that is about something totally different, but it's still the same company.
It's happening all the time. And so I was also asking my uncle about the proprietary coating right on the outside of the mRNA vaccine, and he was like, "Well, it is proprietary to the point that like the companies aren't publicly released. Like, well, the FDA knows what what the formula is. Like, that's all fucking well and good, but the same thing applies." Then that like I don't necessarily trust this administrative body,
Yeah.
that I don't not consume things that aren't FDA approved, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't subscribe my whole life to what the FDA is telling me to do, and part of the reason is because there's shit like vitamins and whatnot, supplements that aren't FDA approved, that are not regulated, things that should be regulated that
Yep.
are not regulated, things like kratom that they are trying to regulate that shouldn't be regulated, cannabis,
Yep.
all kinds of things,
Did you hear about the latest one, that NAC, the NAC?
Right.
I
right.
started looking into that today, and I'm like, holy shit, yeah, it was a supplement. Now it's technically a drug, and you
Right.
can't. I can still find it online certain places, but like, it's so weird that they're going into these trial things, and we could talk about that in depth more. I got some pages pulled up, but
Right, and
it's weird that I don't trust them to be doing things like this, because there's so much evidence all around of them making what I would say are like untrustworthy decisions.
Right.
And it does not help when it's like, well, it's the FDA, you should trust them. I'm like, I
Yep.
don't.
And
That's the problem.
I appreciate that it is a relatively independent body in the way that people are not appointed at the FDA. From what I understand, people work at the FDA, and like, so the president is not picking who like is the head of the FDA. From what I understand.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a more internal selection process.
Right.
I think as far as executive agencies and stuff, they have a little bit more independence on who's running and who's not. But
Right.
again, I'm not an expert on the makeup of the FBA,
Right.
FDA structure.
My only point, and just like I was talking about the last time we were here, right? I don't trust really any government organization.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to just believe this because, well, the FDA has the information, and so if it was harmful in some way, then we would know about it. I don't necessarily believe that, because there are so many things that are continue to be found harmful afterwards, right?
Yeah.
And that's where my long-term question comes in, right? So my uncle's response to this was totally reasonable. A lot of people want long-term data because COVID is killing more people, and whatever. Because COVID is killing more people than the vaccine is, because people aren't necessarily dying from the vaccine.
Yeah.
More research and time is being put into what are the long-term effects of COVID, not what are the long-term effects of the vaccine.
Yeah.
Which I understand, but again, I don't agree with, because if we're asking you to inject something in your body,
If we're mandating it.
and then continue to get boosters months and months and months afterwards, right?
Yeah.
And this right now
Against FDA,
right.
against their advisory
We're going to
board.
continue to ask you to get boosters. I think that it is just as important that I understand what the long-term effects of that are, if I'm going to not only get it one time, 2 times maybe, because if you have the Pfizer or the Moderna, right, but now 3 times, maybe 4 times, 5 times, maybe every year, if it's now going to be doing, the same thing as the flu, if we're going to have to continue to get different vaccines for it every single year, I think that it's important and reasonable for me to want to know what the long-term effects of that are, you know?
That seems very reasonable,
Like,
you'd think, right?
And so I just don't... I completely understand everything that he said, and it all makes sense.
Yep.
But just like... I think it was kind of consistent with what we've been talking about. I'm not trying to mischaracterize anything, but like there's just more there that's not being talked about that I don't agree with. You know, there are things being left out here that I think need to not be left out.
Yeah, yeah, because it's when you think about like if you think of the path of studying the long-term effects of COVID over the long-term effects of the vaccine, you would kind of be assuming that if you're more interested in the long-term effects of long COVID or what happens to you 10 years down the road, once you run through a cycle of COVID and you recover and everything's fine, but what does that look like on your body 10 years from now? If that's the track you're going to take versus studying the long terms of the vaccine, does that not indicate that your long-term goal is essentially more of like everyone is going to be eventually getting this, so we need to understand that first over the long-term effects of the vaccine? But we're not walking down that road. We're not talking herd immunity. We're not talking about that. We're talking about everybody getting vaccinated, period, full stop. You have to do it.
Right.
And so at that point, why would your shift not be, if that's what you're going to force people to do? And so when you're not doing that, it feels very, the red flags start to go up. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why are we studying that? If our path is going to be the vaccination, all the research should be on that. Well, equal amounts of research probably be done on both.
We should.
That would be the best, most logical way for me.
The administration loves multi-pronged approaches.
Yes.
So there should be, at the very least, a three-pronged approach in which we are looking actively at the long-term effects of COVID, the long-term effects of the vaccine, and then also how long you're good with your antibodies once you've had COVID. Because, like you said, this is the third arm that people want to ignore. It's the third nipple in your armpit that people don't want to talk about. The ugly third nipple that begs to be ignored.
Don't talk shit about my cute little third nipple.
So and that concerns me, right? And I asked my uncle about it right as we were leaving, so he did not get to finish his thought, right? I asked about long-term effects, like people who've had it, like that's not being talked about. So I'm certainly not looking to get the vaccine right now, I said, because certainly at this point, there's no point, And if we're talking about me,
brother just got COVID, bro,
and my wife and my kid, so my kid's not even 3 years old now. Now we're talking about giving him a vaccine to do that. And he was like, well, he's good for at least a year, and stuff like that. And then we had to get up and leave. And so, again, that's all well and good, but I don't.
Yeah.
He's a child, and children are not the same as adults. They're not just tiny adults.
Yeah, your whole body is different.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And so I am just extremely hesitant, even more hesitant than myself. I would sooner get the vaccine than I would give it to my son.
Yeah, because you're willing to take the unknown.
Do you know
risk.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I don't know, and no one can tell me what is going to happen when a 3-year-old gets it and then they grow up to be 18 years old, and what the possible long-term effects were from getting the COVID-19 vaccines. No one knows yet.
Nope.
No one knows.
No one
knows. I don't think that's... Not even I don't think, I know for certain that is not an unreasonable question. What is going to happen to him if he gets the COVID-19 vaccine while he is going through being a toddler, while he is going through elementary school, through puberty, into adulthood?
Yep.
What is going to happen?
How
is it going to affect those things?
Yep.
No one knows. What if he doesn't go through puberty? I'm not trying to fearmonger. I'm not trying to just be like, what about this and this and this? I'm like,
yeah.
But these things, and as a parent, and I'm going to stop qualifying what I'm saying, but these are the things that concerns me,
Well, and that makes sense, because what you're essentially doing is just pointing out a few of the unknowns. When somebody says, I am concerned about possible long-term effects because we have no idea what they may or may not be, and nobody can tell you that at this point because there's no data on it, because this is real-time stuff.
You can say there's no evidence of that.
Yeah.
Great.
There is no evidence of that because we haven't gotten there yet. We don't have the ability to do a long-term study yet. Some of them are in process. They are, but we're not 10 years later yet. This is not 2030 yet.
Right.
We don't have a decade worth of stats on this
We
stuff.
don't even have a breakthrough percentage for people with the vaccine.
No.
And that's he was also saying, he was like,
that's bothering me.
He said that he thinks that they're definitely collecting that data, but not releasing it. I was drinking, so I did not think at the time to ask, why wouldn't they'd be releasing that information, other than to just try and protect the integrity of the vaccine and the campaign of continuing to get the vaccine, right? But even then, you have to. I don't know. I don't know how you collect all of that data if people are not reporting all of the time. If you get it at home and you don't tell anybody about it, then you don't know.
Yeah.
You know, if you get the vaccine and you're like, I feel kind of weird, or maybe I was around somebody who did have COVID, so I decided to pick up a home test and I did it at home, and then you test positive. How do you know that? If you don't call, right?
Yep.
The only reason anybody knew is because I went to the hospital and got tested. That's the only reason anybody in the state knew. Because I told you, I got 3 phone calls and 2 text messages in different languages about trying to contact trace for the virus, right? So if you get it at home, then no one knows. And so, again, I'm not fear-mongering. I'm not, and that's for YouTube, not for anybody else, right? This is for YouTube. I'm not fear-mongering. I'm not questioning. I'm asking a genuine question of how do we know that? You know, even if we are collecting that data, it's still only the data from people who are showing up at medical centers with COVID, right? The same thing with people who haven't been vaccinated with COVID. If you got COVID, right, and if you tested positive at home with a home test, you're not going to go to the doctor unless you need to go to the doctor. You've already had it. You're just, you know, even if you hadn't already had it.
Yeah, I'm going to be more pissed off about, like, you know, the 2-week quarantine and, like, trying to run my life while I have to stay in my house.
If I was able to have purchased an at-home test when I had COVID, I would not have gone to the doctor.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have called my doctor to say, hey, I just tested positive for COVID. I just wanted you guys to know.
Yeah. Because you know the deal.
I would have stayed at home unless I needed to go to the doctor. The only reason I had a doctor's appointment anyway was because I thought I had a sinus infection before I knew about the COVID. That's the only reason I went to the doctor anyway. So I don't understand that. I don't get it. I don't understand
the demonization of asking a question that is perfectly reasonable and logical. I don't understand
like such
why
a valuable
we get pushback.
piece of information.
Yes,
you know
that we are not getting, and we've had so many problems with the integrity and we'll just say the integrity of the data that we've been able to collect, because it seems as if the one thing the government is supposed to be good at is collecting data and making policy decisions off of data.
Yeah.
I think that this last year has shown us that they are really bad at doing that on the fly. They're really bad at trying to responsibly track data to make informed decisions and inform the American populace based off of that data. If our entire tact throughout this process from the executive has been, you know, if it was informational and, you know, suggestions type of deals, like, hey, we're trying to look out for everybody. These are the numbers we're seeing. This is what we think people should be doing. Our scientists are saying this stuff. We're trying to be as transparent as possible so that people can be making the right decisions in their own lives.
Right.
But that's not the tact they've taken. They've taken the authoritarian tact where we tell you what to do because we know better than everyone else. And when something like this comes around where I say, why don't we have data on previous infections and antibody retainment and stuff like that? Why don't we have any of that data? I understand it's hard to get, but like you have some data out there. I know you do, but you're not sharing that for some reason. And when you already have an antitrust bias built into that particular agency because you've proven to the populace as a whole that your word cannot be trusted because you've backtracked on everything from the beginning.
Right.
You flip-flop and turn around, and I don't know how anybody can put their full trust in this system. And when you tell me to trust you, I don't trust you anymore. And if you continue that tact of just telling people what to do based off of your correct, you know, it's the right way to do it because we have all the experts, we have all the great minds, it doesn't help your argument, doesn't help the vaccine hesitant, if you will, bring people onto your side. And obviously, we've talked about this before, the stance has gone from more just totalitarian, authoritarian stuff to like you're now belittling people who are not joining your team and joining the side of what you want. And that makes it
the
even
division we
worse.
were talking about last week.
Yeah. You know, you're sowing division through this stuff, which is making people not trust you even more.
Right.
And the moves that you make, some of the stuff we'll talk about, like you saw the Rochelle Walensky overruling the FDA's decision about boosters in specific demographics. I got the story. We could pull it up and read it if you would like.
Yeah, so because the last that I have here, right, is that the FDA had rejected boosters for everybody, but it said 65 and older and people with compromised immune systems should get boosters, right? So what is this story here?
So let me pull this story up here.
Yes.
Show you. Right now we have mics on. There we go, guys. From the New York Times, the CDC chief overrules agency panel and recommends Pfizer BioNTech boosters for workers at risk. In a highly unusual decision, the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, reversed a move by agency advisors and endorsed additional doses of the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine for healthcare workers, teachers, and other workers at risk. So that we're talking about the group of people that are being subject to the federal mandates at this point.
Yes.
And they're seeing what else they can mandate, hence the boosters. And the CDC director, who is an appointed position, is now overruling the agency advisory board to make a decision like that. I would assume that the members that make up that advisory board are far and beyond more qualified than the CDC director Rachel Walensky. Rochelle Walensky. Yeah, but I don't know why she has the ability to do that. That seems wrong to me.
Because she's part of the executive branch.
Which is exactly, and that right there. Talk about trust and division in trust, if you will. You're now making it harder for more people that are already having a hard time trusting you. You're pushing them farther away from that. When an appointed official can overrule the rest of the advisory board because she thinks it's the right thing to do.
And I do just want to take 1 second and remind everybody that you can hear us talk about these things consistently when we are not live. We have our own personal social media. I am at Salt of the Street on Twitter and at alpaca_Donovan on Instagram. Colin is at Big Bird Offie on both of those things. You can find all this on saltofthestreets.com. Also, we have our Salt of the Streets Instagram at Salt of the Streets, our Facebook, fuck Facebook at Salt of the Streets, YouTube, obviously, where you're watching us now, Salt of the Streets. Thank you. Leave us a like and a comment. Share us. Subscribe. Do the notifications and everything because you can finally see them now. We also have a Patreon, finally. Patreon.com/Salt of the Streets. Let's take the shots real quick. Celebrate our Patreon.
Cheers, buddy. Congrats.
Not over the laptop, right?
Whoop, whoop.
Definitely more cinnamon in that one.
Woo, yeah. That's
Also
more of
wanted
like a fireball deal.
A little bit, yeah.
Like yeah.
I also
brown
wanted to
sugar
remind
fireball.
everybody, obviously, Location Skate Shop. If you need a skateboard, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to interrupt you.
No, you're
If you
good.
need a skate shop, if you need a skateboard, Location Skate Shop in downtown Bremerton. If you need a haircut, just like I do, I'm going to go see him Swell Blended next week. Instagram Swell Blended, swellblended.com. Schedule an appointment. Our wives are also extremely talented, and Lexi Kayo on Twitch. You can go there and you subscribe to her. My wife also making cakes, leggings, and aprons on Instagram. You can go there and find all that information.